All right, well, it's 1 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time, and welcome to Alpha Anywhere demo and Q&A session. I'm Dave McCormick here from Alpha Software, and I'm very excited because today we have a special guest. Instead of Dion, who often joins us on Wednesdays, we have Steve Wood, who's a longtime Alpha developer, going back quite a ways, and also the founder of IADN, the Independent Alpha Developers Network. Today, Steve is going to show you a framework that he's built and that if you're interested in purchasing, you can buy from him, which gives you a head start in building out a web application. At the end of that, we'll take questions about the framework, but we'll also answer your questions about any Alpha Anywhere technical issue you may be having. So I'd like to first point out two things before we get started. First of all, this session is being recorded, and a copy of it you'll be able to find at videos.alphasoftware.com within a couple of days. This is where now all of our previous webinars are being kept. The other thing is that we strongly encourage you to ask questions. It's the point of our Q&A session. You could do that by typing your questions into the questions box of the GoToWebinar interface. So let's begin. Steve, I'll take you off mute. Hello, Steve. Are you there?
I am here. Hello,
Excellent.
guys.
Take it away, my friend.
You know, as David said, I'm one of the longest running Alpha developers. I built the first Alpha web application. It was used as the demo for years in the early stages of the Alpha web ability. But I'm also one of the youngest in that I keep up with the times. And so the framework has actually been my way of keeping a central location for current best practices. So the framework today is quite different than the framework was when I first built it, and it's been different every year because I do my best to update it to be best practices for web applications, also security, and to extend what Alpha does already in the areas of security, etc., to again be best practices. I want to show, before I show the application, the two main objectives of the framework. And Dave, I assume you can see the screen now, my objectives?
Yep, we can see you and your screen.
Me too. Okay, good. I combed my hair for this experience.
Thanks.
So the first objective is that once the web application is operational, I want to be able to do as little as necessary in the actual Alpha developer. I don't want to have to go back to the Alpha developer to modify an A5W page content, to add text and colors and CSS, etc., and to have to republish that. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Once the application is built, I, as a developer, may not be the person who's managing the website. I may be building it for somebody else and passing it to somebody else who may or may not have, the ability to use, may pass that responsibility to an admin of some kind. So I try to make it possible to do it. In fact, I do make it possible to manage nearly everything totally online in the framework, in the published application once it's operational. And the second objective is to streamline development. I use this framework myself. If somebody hires me to build an application, the first thing that I do is make a copy of my current framework and I begin to build in that environment. Sometimes I take parts away, sometimes I add a few things to it, but generally I use the framework out of the box to build a brand new application. And what that allows me to do, first off, is if somebody hires me today, I can, by the end of today, direct them to a website and show something that has some substance to it. It may just be the framework by itself, or it may be the framework with some custom content or a few other things that they've asked for to get things going. But the point is that if you're an experienced Alpha developer, you can install and publish and have this up and running in 5 minutes, including the database. If you're not an experienced Alpha developer, it will take you a little bit longer, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, and the sticky point typically is the database if you're not an experienced SQL user. The framework only comes in SQL, and I have it pre-configured for both MySQL and SQL Server. It runs on other SQL databases, but I have not pre-configured it for such. So the typical sticking points for people are the database if they're not an experienced SQL developer. And David, I assume that you will interrupt me if there's any questions that are pertinent about what I'm talking about at the moment.
I certainly will.
Okay, thank you very much. So there are approximately 100 developers or users who have purchased this framework over the years. This is the current version. It has not been heavily advertised. I have several customers. I have more than a dozen customers now with this framework, but I have not yet to this point actually advertised it. And part of the reason was I've had back-to-back projects for the last 18 months and I've been making the framework current, but I have not had the time to devote to product support and those things. And that changes this summer because many of those projects, or the primary one, and I know they're online with this demo today, is wrapping up, and so I'll be able to focus more heavily on this during the summer. Because one of the things I find is that, again, an experienced alpha developer has no problem getting this up and running, but someone who doesn't have the experience, the problems typically are not with the framework itself, but they are with how do I use alpha in general to publish and build and security. There's a lot of puzzle pieces to put together. So I find that when I'm supporting the quote framework, most often I'm actually supporting new users to alpha in basic concepts. So let's jump into the framework itself and why it's, what's new about it and what makes it modern, best practices, and so on. And the first thing you notice is that it's reasonably attractive and modern. It's not, totally the best looking website you've seen in the world, but it's a very decent starting point for a website, and it does fit the modern style of more of a banded construction where the website goes from right to left across the entire surface and is centered in the middle. One of the things you'll notice that right off the bat is if I shrink my page down, my navigation goes straight to a mobile style navigation. So rather than being a non-responsive navigation, it will have a responsive navigation, and in fact every public page in the framework is responsive in that if you shrink it down to the size of a tablet or a telephone, mobile phone, it will shift to this menu. Images will automatically change their dimensions to fit the screen, and all the content will fit within the screen as well, stacked on top of each other with the footer at the bottom. This is one of the primary updates for version 4. Every single thing on the screen you see from the top left to the bottom right is 100% managed online in content management. So everything here is content management. The lines of code in the A5W page to produce this page that you see in front of you is 27 lines long. It's not 1,000 lines or 100 lines. There's no content there. It's simply pointers to where the content lies, and including things like the login, sign-up buttons, etc. They're all managed on content management. And the reason for that, again, is that if you have this website up and running and a client calls you, or perhaps if you're the client yourself, and you need to make a change to the text right here, you don't want to have to go back to Alpha Developer, modify that text, and publish it back to the site for a variety of reasons. One, it's cumbersome. Number two, it can cause your site to be disruptive if you're publishing in the middle of while people are using it, depending on what you're publishing, etc. So this really creates a great advantage for that. And when I say content management, I'm also including the navigation, the main logo, title across to the right, which can be there or disappear. Most people remove the title. It's not necessary. And also the footer, and includes the social media links. These social media links are part of what's called Add This. And once the site is up and running, you create an account, if you want to, at Add This. And then if somebody comes to your site and clicks on any of these social media buttons, it will share your website with that social media location and attribute it to you in the Add This account that you have, and you can keep track of your social media hits to the site. Let's log in to this. And now the only thing that has changed so far is there's a menu across the bottom. This is the Alpha navigation. Alpha has its own built-in navigation tool, and then the one on top is My Navigation. It's part of the framework. The differences between the two is the navigation that I provided, which is the one with the black background, is totally responsive, and you can manage all of the nodes online. The Alpha navigation requires you to go to the Alpha developer and to publish it from there. and it also is not responsive. So if you were to have lots of links across the top, they would not collapse into this nice navigation you see here. So in most of my applications now, I actually omit the alpha navigation entirely and use my menu completely. And in fact, the navigation that I provided also handles security, so you can tell it to show or not show certain menu nodes based upon login. So let's take a look at the only important thing here, which is the admin. And the admin is the nuts and bolts of the framework. It's where you manage all of the pieces of the website, the content, and everything else. And you'll notice right off the bat that this tabbed UI and navigation is extremely bland. And it's bland on purpose because the intention is that you will put this into your application and it will assume the look and feel of your application. I don't want to pre-populate this with my own ideas of what navigation or what look and feel should look like, so that will take on the shape of your website. As an example, here is a website that uses the framework that the area that's usually bland has been perked up quite a bit with icons. And then here, this portion right here under website, that's the framework. That's the framework admin piece with one piece added. And so this is what your website can look like with very little work, even though it is delivered just like this. So under website admin, what do we have? We have a lot of sections in here. The framework is actually quite large in its delivery. We have manage users. Before I do that, actually, I need to go back to the framework homepage. Let's go back here. A very important aspect of the framework, and I said it has best practices. When you sign up for an account, assuming you have a link on your site for sign up, it goes through what's called double opt-in. It doesn't just register the user right here and there and allow them access to the system. And most of the applications I've looked at, Alpha 5 applications included, built by people who aren't following best practices, I should say, what they do is they allow the person to register and then immediately log into the website. That's a mistake. So what double opt-in does is it sends an email to the person's account. They're required to click a link in the email, and that link takes them back to the site to validate their registration. If you don't do that, you cannot verify that that email address they used for registration actually belongs to them. And if you go to any website today, any modern website, and you register, that's the process that they use. So that's the process that's in the framework. So once they do that, let me go back and log in now. That person who is registered will end up under Manage Users as a pending user. Okay, let me back up. Once the email has been sent to the client, to the user, they are pending, which means they're not actually allowed to log in. They actually physically are not added to Alpha 5, Alpha Anywhere's security. They cannot log in. They're not official. They're pending. They're entered temporarily into a local list of users, and here you can see this person's name, who obviously I've been typing random characters there, that person has registered or begun the registration process but has not finished because they have not clicked the link. And you will find that some percentage of people never click the link, never follow through, because either they didn't get the email because it went to spam, didn't care, didn't want to follow up with the registration, they weren't really interested. That's the nature of double opt-in. The first opt-in is when they click the button saying they want to register. The second opt-in is when they actually click the link in the email to confirm the registration. That's what double opt-in means. And so you can slough these off after some period of time, and there is a function in the framework to automatically clear them out after some period of time that you can set yourself, and so it'll automatically clear them out. Or you can keep them, and you can market to these people who have started the process but not finished it, assuming that they actually had some interest. Once they have clicked that link to continue the registration, they're toggled to active. Once they're active, they can log in. And when they log in, a lot of things happen. Alpha, Alpha itself, is, because I've toggled it to do so, is keeping track of all the logins and the failed logins to a text file. You can opt to have that sent to a database table instead, so you can do more analytics on who has actually logged in. It keeps track of the last date that somebody logs in, and you can, if you want to, you can come to this button, click the lock button, and you will lock that user out. This happens rarely, but sometimes you have to lock somebody out because they've been abusive on your site, or because they don't belong there, or because of a variety of reasons. Alpha itself has a lot of security that you will toggle in Alpha, not in my framework, such as to make sure that they, if they try to log in 3 times with a wrong password, they will be locked out for a period of time. You can actually unlock them through this mechanism right here if you need to. So you can, as an admin, come to a pending user, click on security, and toggle them to be live. You'd have to enter a password and select a security group. This is actually not very desired because, really, quite frankly, you as the admin should not know the user's password, so you want to make sure they change the password afterwards. But this is an option that you can do, and it happens once in a while where somebody just can't figure out how to log in, how to register, and so you help them out. The security groups that you see here are from Alpha. They're not defined in the framework, they're defined in Alpha. And so as you add security groups to your application, they will magically appear on the list here. We have details for every user. Now, the details that I have chosen for my framework may not be the details that you want for your user. So I won't go into it today, but where in the Alpha Anywhere program you define these users, you can add any other fields that you want to, or you can take fields away as well. That's important. I have to admit that probably 90% of the people don't ever change that, but it is available as an option. If you delete a user here, they're gone. They get taken out of security framework, they can no longer log in, and they're not notified. In a large application, this grid becomes very useful as a way to find users because you can search by a variety of parameters and you can add to these parameters. So on, for instance, the IADN website, I have 2,000 registered users. So I have to sort and slice and dice sometimes to find users in a certain country for some reason or else. And I have a lot of pending users who never finished the registration. I have to go through that occasionally. I don't automatically purge them. I look at them to see who they are, and I try to help them get registered, or perhaps I delete them after, let's say, a year. So that's it for users. That's just the first node in the framework. We also have the ability to send users email. So you can send users to any group that you want to. You can send users to all the ones who are marked invite. I didn't mention that, but you can click invite for users, and it sends an email to them to invite them to join your website. You can pick one of the standard email templates that are included with the framework, or you can design your own email. And this will send an email out to the clients that you've selected. Company is an abstract model for multi-tenant. So in the framework, you have users, and then you have a layer called company. It's an arbitrarily named layer called company above users. You may have a different name for what you would, the entity that would want to manage users, but the typical situation is where you're providing this to a company that has multiple companies who log in, and each of those companies need to manage their own set of users, and that's what this is for. The My Account here is simply a broadcast of what the My Account screen looks like for the user. Every user has an account, of course. When they log in, they can go to My Account and change the details about their account, if you allow them to. And that includes details of their personal details and the password information. Importantly, in the framework, when they change their user ID, they're logged out and they have to log back in. An update that's coming in the framework, because this actually is not best practices. The best practices for this, if you go to Facebook or LinkedIn and try to change your user ID or your password, it will force you to receive an email where you will process that transaction. You can't do it online. So I'm actually modifying this in the next release to be closer to best practices for that. I don't hear the questions, Dave, so either I'm talking too fast or being too thorough.
I think you're doing great. There are no questions yet on the framework, but keep going.
Very good. Okay. So the heart of the framework is the website configuration. Under configuration, you give it a name for the application and a URL for where it lies within the World Wide Web. These are important. All of these fields are important because they are email mail merge fields. So when you send an email out to somebody, you can tell it to put this information into the email. So it will pull in something like, you might say, welcome to, and then you'd put the mail merge field in for the application name. And it would say, welcome to application name here, or whatever you put. The URL is important because, as I mentioned, the framework sends out email with links in them that link back to your site. You need to have pre-scripted what that URL domain anyway is. In my case here, it's a5v12.com/frameworkv4. That will be prefixed onto any email that goes out, so that when they click for the link, the link that's embedded in the email. So when they click on that link, it knows to go to that domain. The framework is licensed per server, I should mention at this point. So when you activate the license, it's activated per server. And this is exactly the same licensing strategy that Alpha Anywhere has for their web application server. You can tell the site to be online, which is, of course, where it typically is. You can take it offline. And offline means that anybody coming to your site will get this message and nothing else. And they can't log in, and they can't go past that point. You can also change it to admin. Admin's a little more interesting in that the website appears completely normal, but only you can log in, or you and the other admins, people who you've designated as admin. And the reason for that is obvious. At some point, you have a functioning application, something goes wrong, whatever it is, and you need to make sure that nobody can get in. Your users have to be logged out, and only you can log in to do some maintenance, perhaps. And so you toggle this to admin only, then only you can get in. There's various other pieces of mail merge, contact information, admin email. There's a few places in the framework where it will email you if there's trouble. Like there's an SQL error method in here where if there's an error in your SQL, things that you've written, not the framework, it's been vetted already, but things that you've written, you can tell it to email you upon an error, and it will send that email to. It will send that error message to that email address, alerting you that there's some trouble on your website. And the same thing for mobile address. System settings. You can tell it to omit or include debug information. At the bottom of the site, it will show all kinds of session variables and other debug information if you toggle it on. This helps you during the development phase. You can tell it to run in test mode, which it does absolutely nothing. All it does is set a session variable that you might use as the developer to say, this is in test mode, and because this box is checked right here, here's how the application is going to behave. I personally use this when I'm building an application, and it's online, but I find I have something I have to do. And so I toggle to test mode, and I can turn off things like the PayPal payment processing, the subscription processing, and other things that I don't want to function because it's running in test mode. You can tell it to omit or include login. You recall back at the top, and you can log out of here. In the upper left, it said login. It doesn't right now, but it said login and sign up in the upper left. You can toggle those on or off and describe how you want them to read. Login, you might like the word log on rather than log in. And then same with registration. You can tell it to omit or include. And you can also define what the standard security group will be. Very important when somebody registers, you need to assign them to an alpha security group. If you don't, they actually can't log in. So this is the default group that all registered users will be assigned to. If it's something more fancy than that, you have to do a little bit of programming to assign them to more than one user. The cron we can go into in a different session. It has a whole process in the background for scheduling events using what's called cron tab. It's more of an advanced topic. Under header, we have the ability to omit the logo. This was a logo, remember, in the upper right of the home page. Tell it to omit that logo, and if it's there, you can tell it what the logo name is, which is typically logo, and you can tell it what happens when you click on the logo. So in this case, when you click on the logo on any of the pages in the system, it will take you back to index, which is the home page. It has a infrequently used ticker system where it will show a message at the top of the website. This is only really useful if you have, let's say you have a sales website and you have a special of some kind you want to alert people to. You can tell it that you want a message to appear at the top of the website, maybe a marquee that scrolls across and tells them that there's a sale. You can also use it to say that the system is down for maintenance, although there's a better system for that built into their framework. This shouldn't have that garbage in it, but the tabbed UI, now you may have multiple tabbed UIs in your system, but there is a main framework tabbed UI, and whatever information you put here will end up in the header of the tabbed UI. And you wouldn't put Steve Wood there. You'd put an image. You'd put some kind of HTML there to give the top part of your tabbed UI a little flair, perhaps. And then the same for the footer. Typically, copyright is all that goes there. Page code. We're getting kind of deep into the esoterics of the framework at this point, but you can have code that fires on every page in the head HTML area. And in this case, I'm firing swobject.js because I probably in this particular site have a slideshow.
But this would be a good place to put in Google Analytics or anything like that if you were.
That goes someplace. That typically goes in the body tag.
Into the body tag. Okay, I see.
Yeah, because Google Analytics goes in the bottom. And these are all those things that if you're an experienced web developer, you have in your head. But the truth is, if you're not, this helps a bit because that says right here, like Google Analytics.
Mm-hmm. Perfect.
So one of the nice things about the framework is that it kind of scripts in some best practices. Although you can mess things up, but it kind of builds in if you follow the instructions here, you will end up being best practices or pretty close to it. Meta keywords, meta description. If you're familiar with SEO, search engine optimization, you should have keywords, which are what Google and other search engines will less today than they used to, but will search on your site based on keywords. If somebody types in alpha and you have alpha here, your site will be slightly elevated in the search engine because of that. The same with description. You put a description, a generic description of your website here. That's what shows when you go to Google and other engines. When it says, it shows your site and it shows description, it'll have that text there, that whatever you type in right there. What you type in here appears on every single page. Hold on. On every page. Now, best practices are that on every page they should be different. And so we may not go into it. There's a part of the framework where you go into each page and you can define what the meta keywords and description will be on that particular page. And you can tell it to either replace the global description or to append to the global description. And that's actually very important. I should slip in here a little note that if you're building your application entirely upon tabbed UI and search engine optimization is important to you, you need to either think about having some A5W pages that have rich content on them for searchability, or very closely follow the instructions that I'm not sure where they are on the tabbed UI on how to make that search engine optimization effective. SMTP, the system has the ability to use, it's hard to show here without going to my server, but Alpha has like two methods for sending email. One is the Alpha profile, email profile, which is defined on the server, and the other one is SMTP. So you can do either one in Alpha, and over time, I predict that we will do away with the Alpha email profile and go totally SMTP, which is what this defines right here. And some minor points here. If you recall back here, the background is black for the main navigation. You can change that to some other color. Other minor things, and I've chosen the CSS theme of default. You can add other themes to the system, and maybe I someday may even build some. And so if you decide that you want to change the site from its default setting to one called colorful, you would just come here and select the word colorful from the drop down, and your site would instantly have that CSS, that look and feel. It's a lot easier. Well, this would be something that would be designed for if you want to build in several different themes and change them, perhaps to show a client. Typically, once you have adopted a look and feel, you don't change it much. So, but this is a nice advantage, and it was put there because a client asked me, what are the other themes do you have? Let's submit this and see if it works. I haven't tried it for a long time. Yeah, so it works. So it changes the color, which is kind of fun to watch in a way. Let's get into some more stuff. I'm probably running out of time. We have email templates. In fact, Dave, how much time do I have left?
Please go ahead and do as much as you want. Yep.
We have email templates built into this, and templates are exactly as they sound. They are either text. This is just text, plain text, or you can define optionally. I don't tend to do it, but you can define optionally an HTML-based message. And so what happens now is that this, with the curly brackets around it, is a mail merge field. So there's a list of them over here that are built in, and you can add whatever you want, but these are built in. So full name is going to put in the name of the person, Steve Wood, the first name and the last name, and it'll put it in at that particular point. This particular email is one that goes to an invitation for users to register, no password included. That's the description of the email. So there's no password in here, but it has their user ID. This is kind of an odd template because they're very infrequently used. The one that's used more often, I would have to say, is registration. So welcome to, again, like app name. So welcome to my application. Here's your user ID. Here's your password, which I have to admit is not best practices, but it's there, and allows them to log in. And then here's a confirmation link. That's that link I told you about that ends up in the email that they click to continue the registration. And I may have to look at this because having the email, having the user ID and the password in the same email is definitely not best practices, so I have to make a note of that. Continuing, we have navigation, which is really a fun thing to look at. So I really am devoted to managing my websites online and not having to rely upon Alpha. I love the Alpha development system, but once I'm through with an application, I don't want to go there unless the client, or unless it's my own application, but if the client asks me for some specific modification that requires some coding. But as much as possible, I want to manage it online for a couple of reasons. One, it's easy for me. I log in, I make the change. Number two, I can tell the client to log in and make the change. And you know, in some places that's perfectly acceptable. They want to do that. In some places they don't. So if I take any example here, let's add a brand new node here for Alpha, and their URL is I believe that's correct, alphasoftware.com, and
small typo with Alpha Software. It should be .com, not OCM.
I was going to try to prove that you don't actually exist. Okay. So I've positioned it as menu node number 9. I can position it wherever I want to by changing the number. It's just called Alpha. That's what the node's going to be called. It's going to go there. I said self, which means it's going to open up in a brand new browser tab. I did not change the color. I could tell it by typing a color name in here. I could change the color of the node. And if I want to get really fancy, I can type any CSS I want to in this space right here. And I won't. Now here's the thing that's really good about this, and I added this 6-8 months ago. You can tell it what security level the user has to be logged in as in order to see this menu. And by doing that, that made this navigation equivalent to the Alpha built-in navigation, because I can tell it to show or not show nodes based upon security. So I'll leave it off for now. I'll submit this. I'll go back to the site. I'll refresh my page. And there's Alpha brand just added there. I'll click that, and hopefully it'll go off to the website. Yeah, there it is. So that part works.
Great.
If I were to, and I won't go through all this, I'll just change it to admin. And I'm not sure if I'm logged in or not. I am logged in. Let me log out. It's supposed to not be there. Let me see if I made a mistake. Oh, I made a mistake. So I clicked on the wrong node. Hang on, let me fix that. That's the one I want. Very good. Okay. Okay. So because I'm not logged in as an admin, the alpha link doesn't show up, and that makes my menu navigation functionally equivalent to Alpha's built-in navigation, with the added advantage that it is responsive. I'm not trying to compare, David.
It's excellent. Very well done.
But there's a point to be made is that Alpha provides a fantastic tool, and then there are things that developers over time will work around and use or not use. And there are, of all the tools that Alpha has, there's thousands of things that I don't do in every application, and then I pick and choose as necessary depending on the application. So let me log back in over here. Okay, and let me continue with the website plugins. Anybody who actually currently has the framework, I should tell you, I'm taking this out. It actually hasn't functioned very well. It turns out that there's very few plugins that people need that don't require some fancy footwork to actually implement them. I had a very decent system in here for implementing plugins, but as I tried different plugins, I found that they didn't necessarily always fit the model that a generic model that allowed me to have a plugins module within the framework. So I'm having a hard time making it work for anything other than a specific set of plugins. And plugins would be things like the social media navigation and so on. Session variables. Now this is really nitty-gritty developer stuff, but you have, in every application, you will have some number of session variables that tell the system information it needs to know. An example of that is this CO, which stands for company ID. So as they log in, if you have designated that, let's say, Steve Wood belongs to company General Mills, and for some reason you need to know that, when you come to a tabbed UI, you want to make sure that you only show records that belong to General Mills when Steve is logged in. So to do that, you run a little bit of code here, which I won't go into, that populates COID, which is session.coid for those of you who have Alpha experience. And you can use that information everywhere in the system to say that Steve Wood, who is logged in, is a member of this particular company ID. And you can use that typically to filter records, sometimes also to say things on the screen like, this is Steve Wood and he is employed by General Mills. Sitemap is getting really nitty-gritty, but every website is supposed to have, list them for me, robots.txt and a sitemap.xml.
Yep.
And if you don't have those and you don't know what those are, write them down. Robots, plural, .text, and sitemap.xml. Sometimes sitemap.txt, but more often XML. So what this module does is it creates that for you. It creates the it creates the sitemap stuff, sitemap.xml, and two other ones which are less used. It puts them on your site, and it also sends you a copy to yourself, because what you typically do, and this is a very short list of pages, you'd have typically a lot more than this, it sends you that list, and you can then take that list and send it to Google. Although now I'm dating myself because that's not the way it works anymore. The way it works is you publish it to your site, which is what this module does. It does publish it to the site. Then you tell Google to go look for it. Right. That's how it works now. You used to have to mail it to it, but you don't anymore. And the other engines are the same way. And this tells the search engines specific things about your site, like how often to come back and look for changes. So that's what these frequency and ranking things are all about. In my applications, I extend this, because if I have an application that has, let's say it sells product, the IADN website, for instance, sells product. So I want to publish not just this flat static information, but I want to publish a link, a dynamic link for every single product that I sell, along with some descriptions, or just the link. All Google wants is the link. So I add to this a routine that will go look for all of my products and create a unique URL with the appropriate URL parameters in them, and that becomes part of my sitemap. Now, when a search engine comes to my site, they see all my products, and they will index those products, and they wouldn't do that under normal circumstances because, as most of us do, we have our products, our records in grids, and grids are not search engine friendly by nature, not just alpha, but by nature, because the search engine is not going to know to click the little 1, the 2, and the first page, second page, and those things in there. It doesn't do that. So you need actual URLs to get to your site. And in my IADN site and my Alpha2Go site for the stores, the product purchasing area, it does that. It produces unique URLs that Google can go look at the product, see the description, and index that. That's a big subject. So if you are into SEO, that was probably a very poor description of how SEO works, but that's the best I can do. I can't do everything. So continuing on, content is where it gets to be really fun. We've talked about that a little bit with the navigation. So content has been around, content management has been around in the framework since the very beginning, and it's improved quite a bit. And what I'm talking about is content is right here. So this is content. It includes the word sample content header, the image, and the text. This is one piece of content right here. And we come to the framework, I happen to know that that is index 1. And so, and here, here's the heading, here's the content text, and here's the image, which there's an image browser you can click to bring up all your images and select the one you want. That's a brand new addition to the framework, version 4, where you can actually select your images from a drop-down. And all these nodes and buttons you can use to modify your content. You can change everything that's up here with a very easy configuration in a text file. This is the full Monty here. It's all the buttons you can have in this editor. This is, for those of you who are keeping notes, this is called CK Editor, and you can go to ckeditor.com to see this particular object. It's the same editor that Alpha uses in their message board.
Yep.
It's enhanced versus the built-in editor that comes with Alpha, and everybody who uses it loves it. It even has spell check. You can click on the button for spell check, and all these words are misspelled, of course, because it's fake Latin. But you can use it to correct spelling. Very important. Where was I going with this? Other minor details about content. You can define a variety of things which are less important now, because one thing I forgot to mention is the entire site is based upon what's called a grid. If you've ever built web pages before and you haven't looked into what's called grid systems, most modern websites now use what's called a grid system, and I use one called 996 Grid. You can go to 996grid.com. It's a simple, straightforward grid system, and by grid, it means exactly that. It's like a spreadsheet, and you define where your content goes by the cells in the spreadsheet. And if you lay out your page with cells in certain orders and put the content in those cells, you can dispense with a lot of the CSS you used to have to do to position things on the page and float them here, float them right, and size them and so on, because they go in the cell, and the cell doesn't change its shape. So very nice. So this portion of the framework here for content is actually a bit outdated. It's still there because it does serve a purpose and it does work, but it's very infrequently necessary. It even has odd things like you can tell the content to start appearing on a certain date and stop appearing on a certain date. I can't find anybody who's used that, but it's an interesting prospect where you can have content appear for the certain week and then disappear automatically. It was I haven't seen anybody actually use that since I did it. But I mentioned before that you had to know, and I said I happen to know which of these content areas are assigned to which pieces of content on the screen. But that's really a pain for other people because nobody but me, because I've memorized it, knows which content ID goes with which content. So I added this really only a few days ago because my wife became a client of mine, and she says, well, I don't know what content ID matches up to all this stuff. I don't know. And so now I've toggled on something called show hide content areas. And if I come back to my home page and refresh it now, something interesting happens. all the content areas are now bordered in green. And each of them has a link in the lower left-hand corner. And if I click on the link, it takes me straight to a content editor for that particular piece of content. So I change this dude.
So I presume you'd have to be logged in as an admin to have that.
Absolutely. This won't work unless you're logged in. Yeah.
Okay. And is that true for the highlighting on the screen, or is it just won't let you get to the page underneath?
Say it again?
Does it still show highlighting on the screen if you're not an admin, or does it not even show that?
I'll address that in just 1 second.
Okay.
So I've made my change, dude, my application title. Come back here and I'll refresh my screen. And the content's changed. And that's a simplistic, example, but that's the way it works. So important points to Dave's question. These green squares only appear to you, the admin, looking at this screen, nobody else in the world. So if people are logged into your site and you've done this, you have green boxes around your content, they don't see that. Excellent. They see the content one way, and if they refresh the screen after you make the change, they see it the other way. And it's as simple as that. So only you see the green boxes, and only if you're logged in as admin, and only if you've toggled it to do this particular feature. And I'll close this. And I can toggle it back off again, and refreshing my screen, it all disappears. So I mentioned that my wife had me add this particular feature. It's very useful, I've found out in my later years of development, to work with people who are not expert developers, like my wife, because she brings up things, and she's sitting right next to me, not right now, and will bring up points about the framework or my development where I, as an expert developer, I tend not to pay attention to. So it really works to work with somebody who doesn't quite have the same web experience as yourself as a professional developer anyway. So back to the framework. Oh man. It has a banner built into it. So you can define by banner I mean a slideshow. A slideshow, you can have more than one slideshow, and I'm not really prepared in this demo to show that. There is an example of somebody else's website, but I don't have permission to show their website, so I won't. But you can define a banner, and you've all seen banners. You go to any website, and they may have a full-width banner or a narrow one. It always conforms to the size of the cell you've placed the banner into. And this is a professional JavaScript-based banner. It used to be in the older framework. It was Flash, but Flash is no longer. It doesn't. You can't use it on a mobile device. So this is a JavaScript-based banner. It is fully licensed for distribution. It's not. I didn't build it. Somebody else built it, but I've licensed it to be part of the framework so that you can use it without additional cost. I paid for the license for it. Getting into the detail here. Okay, so we have image management. I don't want to stress on this too much. I'm not sure if it's going to work. So here's all the images in my images folder, right? And it tells me the size, and it tells me the byte size, and it tells me whether there is or is not a thumbnail version of this. And this becomes important when you're going into content and you're doing a drop down to select the image that you want to place in some content area. When you import images, there's an import wherever it is. Here it is, upload images. When you upload them, it looks at the size of the picture, and if it's over a certain size, which you can change, but if it's over a certain size, it will create a thumbnail version of that, so that when you go to the drop down to drop in your image into the content, it doesn't give you a massive image thing to try to click on in a window on your website. So it creates a thumbnail. You can, of course, delete them by clicking delete, and you can give it, if you want to, a text, a friendly description to so that you know what they are. You can group them into certain groups, and what that does is when you bring up that drop down to show your images, to select your images for the content, it will categorize them into these particular groups. You can tell it to omit which does nothing other than make it not show up on the screen. Often you'll have images like the header and the footer images that you don't need to put in content, so you could omit them here. So we're getting down to the kind of the details of the framework now. We have reports and logs. There's a whole contact us system in here. So when you're on the website and the person clicks on contact us, if you choose to include this anyway, it asks for basic information and also has this cool CAPTCHA down at the bottom, which I wrote. It's not something that came from Alpha. It's been around for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And it is a fully functional CAPTCHA image, and they have to type in the correct value to have this work. And you need this on forms like this, because if you don't, you'll have robots coming to your site and filling out the form and sending you contact us information. Back to the contact us. So every time someone does that, it sends an email to you. It sends an email to the person who filled out the contact form, and then it also sticks the content or the contact text into this log so that you can come back and review what has been sent to you through the system. We have system logs. These probably won't work because I haven't configured them exactly properly. I mean, let me take that back. They work perfectly in the framework. I have not made sure that I have an error log sitting at logs./error.log. What you would do is when you install this, in the alpha side on the server, you can create logs. Logs for error, log for XBasic errors. There's also logs that you can create for SQL errors. Those come out of my framework. And you can create raw log, which is the detail of every single thing that happens. You can then come back here and define where those logs are being saved at. And then you can come and look at them online. I think the robots.txt should work. I'll open robots.txt. There it is. So here's my robots.txt that I have up on my website. And again, it's rather important that you look at that. It's an important file. So it's the same would work with the rest of these. And what's cool about that is that you can now look at your logs online as opposed to going to remote desktop, logging into your server, and finding the location that Alpha saves the logs and opening them up. You can just look at them online here. And I built this for my own convenience, quite frankly.
Very cool.
Server information. I don't know how many of you have seen this before. It's a wealth of information about the Alpha 5 server. Most of us use this during programming, and that's about it. But sometimes you might want to come down and see what's actually happening with my, what's the path to my data, etc. And then we have report server information, which probably will say it's not running, it's not running. So when you run a report, the way Alpha works is it has its own report server. It's a separate, well, if you have more than one CPU on your machine. When you run your first report, it takes a few seconds longer because it starts up the report server on a separate CPU. Once it's running, then when you click on this button, it'll tell you on the screen here what's running, what reports are in process, and some other performance details about this report server. Maintenance, and then we'll end after this, by the way. The cron allows you to take a batch file, the old standard DOS batch file, and tell it when you want that batch file to fire, and it happens on the server. So here I'm saying I want it to fire on the first minute of the second hour of the third day of the third month of Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So you can get down to having something fire every 5 minutes, or once a year, or once every 2 months. In the batch file,
use that for? Yeah.
I use it to send all my email.
Okay.
So when someone goes to any of my sites and they do something that requires an email being sent, I don't send the email right away, because that takes up valuable resources, and the user will sit there for, even though it's only a few seconds, while the cursor spins and it sends that email. Because it takes up server resources, and it takes between 3 and 5 seconds to do that, and they're hung up for that moment. So I shoot that email over to a queue, and it runs it on a schedule, and the schedule might be, it would be, every 5, right there, every 5 minutes all the time. So every 5 minutes it'll kick off this batch file, and the batch file has an A5W page attached to it that will send the email. The point being, the resource the activity is not happening real time while the user's on the system. It's happening in the background on a different. It doesn't impact the user at all. Is what I'm trying to say.
Right.
And the only price is the email goes off 5 minutes later. Back to this example here, this thing called Quick Alert. If I come to, I have to log in. This is something I wrote for I have a mailbox at this location, and he said his software for alerting his clients is broken. Can you fix it? And I said no, but I wrote him an application in alpha in about 3 days. So this is actually the shortest application and the application with the shortest development time I've ever built. But it allows him to come here and say, I want to send a notice to this guy has mail, this guy has a package, this guy's mailbox is full, this person's mail is on hold because they haven't paid me, and this person gets a custom email of some kind. And if I did this right now, I'd piss off some people because they'd get alerts that would mean nothing, so I won't send these. But what it does, I can't have the poor user waiting for these 50 emails to send. If they click all these buttons, it'll be locked up for a long time. So it goes to the queue, and then the queue fires every 5 minutes in the background. Cool. Other examples are, take any situation where you have to peruse data on some routine basis to find some information, like a user. I'm sorry. Example for somebody who's actually on our demo right now, that you want to do metrics about what's happening with the site, how many of this are being done, how many people are doing that, and you want to do that, but it's okay to do it once a night. So once a night you fire off a utility that does that, and it sends this information off to a table of metrics, and when the user logs in and clicks on that, they see the metrics. Now the metrics happen to be from midnight, but in that particular case it's good enough. And you don't need to, when they click the button, generate the statistics right there, which takes time. That's why.
Cool.
That's about it, David. Really, that's a lot of stuff to cover.
That is excellent. I want to thank
the last
you very
thing,
much
we have one called,
right.
One more thing. All of us developers who are publishing things using AEX files, AEX files are your ability to compile functions, and it's a really convenient way to centralize your programming. You can wait for alphas to clear the cache, because it will. When you publish a new AEX file, alpha doesn't know it for some period of time, because alpha caches a lot of the things that it does. Security is the same way. It takes 300 seconds for security to recache itself. It's the same with AEX. So you click on clear AEX cache, and boom, it's been cleared. And I'm a very impatient developer, and so I click that button rather than waiting the 300 seconds that alpha makes me wait to clear the cache. So I'm exhausted. I don't know about you guys.
Steve, thank you very much. I really appreciate you taking the time to go through this framework. I don't know if you want to put up your contact information or anything like that. We can certainly add it to the end of the video if you want to get directly in touch with Steve. I'm sorry we didn't have time today to go over Q&A for general questions, but please, by all means, send them into guides, GUIDES at alphasoftware.com, and I will get them answered for you. I saw about 4 questions come in this morning from one person who was just interested in some other just general help, and I will get the answers off to you for those, so please send them in. So thank you very much for attending the webinar. Thanks again, Steve, for presenting. This is really, really quite interesting, I thought. And we hope to see you at a future webinar. Oh, just another quick question. If someone buys the framework from you, Steve, do you get 100% access to the code and everything? Or do you basically just give them the source code?
I give them the source code except for probably 1%. And that 1% is not because I'm trying to be sneaky, but because it's just so convenient to compile it. If anybody asks for that code, I would give most of it to them. There's a little bit that involves the registration process. I have to hold that back.
Yeah.
But everything else is whatever you want.
That's great.
Nobody's ever asked for it, though.
Okay. And actually, one more quick framework question. Someone has written in saying, listen, you had this cool section where you were being like for multi-tenancy, where you had not just people, but what companies they belong to. would it be possible to tweak your framework so that not only did you have companies, but you had locations within those companies, so people were dealing with sort of bigger areas, or would it just make sense to say, GE Boston location, GE Florida location?
You could do what you said in the second round, but I have done a more thorough job of that on previous applications where I have 5 layers deep of location specific stuff. And so yes, you could. Here's actually the most important point about that when you ask, can you tweak it?
Okay.
The framework is a normal Alpha Anywhere application. There's nothing in there that isn't just straight out of Alpha Anywhere. A little bit of compiled code that's incidental. So anything that you want to do, you can do with it. And if we had time, I could show you 24 examples of other people's websites based on the framework, and then of course my work that show that.
Right.
I have payment systems built into it for subscription and SaaS. I have all kinds of things built into it as add-ons, and all of these could be added to the framework as an add-on, but typically it starts to make the framework too bulky to do that.
Yep, makes sense.
As it is, it has a hell of a lot built into it.
Awesome. Well, so again, contact information, it's alphatogo.com if you want to learn more about the framework. Also check out IADN, the Independent Alpha Developers Network.com. It's a group of people working outside of Alpha, but all working with Alpha. So that might be of interest to you as well. So thanks again for everyone attended. Thank you, Steve, and we hope to see you at a future webinar. Take care and goodbye.